and welcome back to the From the Nosebleeds podcast, season 3, episode 16. On a Thursday today. Well, I think by the time this will be posted, it's a Friday, but we're 98 days to go to the NFL season. Still a ways away. We've officially approached what I'd call the dry spell of the NFL offseason. But as always, I'm Thomas Pocrnic, joined by Thomas Coburn and producer Paolo Gismondi. Coburn, what's going on?
It's brutal. That's all I got to say. This part of the off yesterday, there's just nothing to watch, first of all, because basketball at this point, I can't get into it. I tried to, and really? I've given up. I
think it's been a pretty exciting, and this is coming from someone who's been very vocal on this podcast of how they've lost their love for the NBA. I think it's been an exciting playoff. I think the Suns, Lakers, the fact
that I'll be watching. There's a game tonight.
That's exciting. I'm all in on the Jazz. I love a team like that doesn't get any attention from the national media. So I'm rooting for them. Always been a big Donovan Mitchell guy. But anyways, yeah, like in terms of the NFL, the only thing going on right now is Julio Jones. And we spent last week's episode talking about Julio Jones. Like it is really, really a bit of a tough time in terms of talking points, content, and all that. We're going to do our best here. We usually go off topic in every episode anyways, so we'll be fine. But I do have to acknowledge this. We always talk about what we do on our weekend, what we've been up to recently. Last episode, you mentioned Habs Leafs, and I gave the famous quote, "This is going to be everywhere. We're going to look back on this quote." You said, "Oh, Habs Leafs is going on." I think the Leafs were up 3-1 at the time. And I said, it's still early days. That is the sign of a fan who just never gives up on their team. Pat on the back to myself, please.
You also tweeted Leafs in 3 before the series started.
See, that is a little bit of satire because you can't win a series in 3 games. So that was just me sort of making a joke when, of course, I was always confident in my Habs all along. And side note, producer Paul is actually converted to a Habs fan.
Which is, I mean, it's what a fraud, first of all. Can't be a Leafs fan and a Habs fan. But, well, as bad as the Leafs are, they're not the worst franchise that I cheer for.
That would be who?
The Detroit Lions. Oh. Come on, wake up.
I don't know. I think the Leafs are. We'll do this because I actually did want to talk about this. Stephen A. Smith, who of course knows absolutely nothing about hockey, but now that ESPN acquired the NHL, he's been doing a few little skits. He's honest about it. He says he knows nothing else, but he made the comparison that the Leafs are the Cowboys of the NFL. I saw another tweet where I can't remember who it was, but they were saying that the only thing comparable to being a Leaf fan is being a Cleveland Browns fan, and maybe even being a Leaf fan is worse than that. So I want to hear from you, your NFL comparison for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
The only thing that's comparable with the Cowboys is, whether you like it or not, they kind of are the center of the universe for hockey. They are, yeah. Like everybody talks about if the Leafs do bad. Everybody talks about if the Cowboys do bad. They get the most flack if they choke in a playoff. It's just how it is. That's the comparable there, which I get. But in terms of success, it isn't. I mean, the Cowboys won a bunch of Super Bowls in the 90s. So, I mean, it's just not even close there. The last Leafs Stanley Cup was 1967 when there was, I believe, 6 teams in the league still. So, I mean, quality competition there.
And we weren't even around for that. Side note.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
We were not alive in 1967. But, yeah, it's got to be. I don't know the Browns, like, I think championships offhand. I know the last time the Lions have won playoff games since 1957. They've won one since 1957. So, I mean, they're even worse.
I mean, the Lions are, I wouldn't say the Lions are a good comparison because they've never, like, the reason I kind of like the Browns comparison is because the Browns were so bad. Like the Leafs were 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe. Yeah. Then they had this sort of a haul of draft picks, which they used on youth. But the only difference is we've seen a turnaround from that with the Cleveland Browns in the sense that they went to the playoffs this year. They won a playoff game and they made it really, really close with the Chiefs, where the Leafs, I mean, they haven't won a playoff series yet. So I struggle to even find a comparison in terms of the NFL teams.
All I can, they're there's not a direct comparison, but they're, the Browns and the Leafs, they're in that kind of bottom of the barrel of like North American sports franchises. They're still together, I'd say. The Browns haven't ascended above them, I don't believe.
And one thing that, this doesn't exist in the NFL. We were talking about this just before the podcast started. The Leafs name it's grammatically incorrect, whereas there's no team in the NFL that has that title.
I don't believe that it's grammatically incorrect. See, I heard this somewhere, and I'm just going to spread it like it's real, is that Leafs with an S is when there's multiple of the same type of leaf, hence maple leafs. They're only maple leaves. Leaves is when there's from a maple tree, you work at a garden center. Give me another tree that a leaf would fall from on the spot.
I don't know.
Oak. Oak tree. There you go. There you go. Oak trees. Yeah, of course.
All I know is I rake the leaves, not the leaves. So we're gonna go with that's grammatically incorrect. But anyways, we got to get to some NFL talk today. Of course, Julio Jones is still a big talking point. We talked about him a ton last week. There's been some new teams that got added, new names that have been floating around. Some teams are out. I read that the Rams are officially out. It even sounds like the Ravens aren't all in on him anymore. Have you changed your mind on any of the suitors for him?
Well, last week I said it as kind of like a long shot, but now with the Seahawks are betting favorites now to get him, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'm almost positive either I said I picked them as the team from the NFC West, or we talked about them a good bunch, but I really would like to see him go to the Seahawks. The division just becomes impossible at this point. It's the rich get richer. That offense with DK Metcalf, him and Tyler Lockett, I don't know how defenses would stop that.
Do the Seahawks need Julio Jones, though? To me, that's the question. There's other areas of their team that would be much, much better to go out and grab a guy who's going to demand a big salary, and you're going to have to give up. I mean, the Seahawks don't even have a first-round pick next year, so it's either a first round 2 years from now or likely a second-round pick. But I don't know. It's
not exactly a need. It's obviously not a need. They have a decent wide receiver core, but if you have Julio Jones, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and how many one-score games do the Seahawks play in? It's every game practically. I'm feeling pretty good about myself if I have Russell Wilson in that wide receiver core for a game-winning drive. It might be we're going to have to score, upper 30s every game, but if there's not another player on the market of Julio Jones's quality that they could add to their defense, for example, that would make as big of a difference as Julio Jones. So yes, it's not the biggest need. If this was the beginning of the offseason and they didn't make any free agent moves and their first move was to trade for Julio Jones, I'd say no, but we're towards the end of it. He's an option. I'd say go and get him.
Yeah, I think the thinking behind that move is essentially that it's just icing on the cake, cherry on top, whatever you want to classify it as, because the Seahawks don't need a wide receiver. But the way their roster is currently built, the defense I still struggle with, and the offense is good, but there's better offenses in the league where I don't think that they can just outscore every single team that they'd come up against. You get a guy like Julio Jones, DK's a number one. Tyler Lockett's a 1A, 1B type receiver. He's really, really good, and I think an underrated player as well. You get Julio Jones, it's exactly that, what you just mentioned, that there's probably not a team that's built to stop these guys. You look at the Seahawks went out to the Rams in the playoffs last year, how they lost that game. It was Jalen Ramsey essentially locking down DK Metcalf. And that gave Aaron Donald all the time he needed to put pressure on Russell Wilson. There's no team that's built to cover Julio Jones. Like, shutting down Julio is one thing. Now you got to worry about DK Metcalf too. It would be a big struggle. So yeah, it's not really a need, but I think it would give them a new identity, and that's how they'd focus on winning games.
And let's look in their division. As it sits right now, I'd say the consensus of number one offense in that division is the Rams, we think, going into the season.
Yeah.
And then from there, you could almost argue Arizona. You could almost argue any team is second or fourth in that whole. You could argue it, right? So right now there's a realistic shot that the Seahawks could have the worst offense in the division. It's not out of the realm of possibility. If they get Julio, it's now they're in competition for 1 or 2. Now the Rams, it's not a for sure thing. They're going to have the most electric offense. That could be the Seahawks. You now might have the best of something in the division, which I don't believe you have right now, aside from quarterback, but it's so close that,
Yeah. Like weeks 1 to 6, you have the best quarterback in the division. We know that. It's just a matter of if Russell can carry that team for so long, because of course we have such high expectations for Matthew Stafford this year. Everyone think Kyler Murray is going to take another step like he did last year. And I mean, when Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have a lot to do, he can be very effective as well. And who knows if they throw Trey Lance in. So the more we're talking about this, the more I want to see him end up in the NFC West. I think it would be probably the most fun, and that division's getting a ton of primetime games this year as well, which is always exciting to see the best players in the biggest moments. But we talked about Julio a ton last week, and this week's episode is dedicated to something entirely different. In general, the NFL offseason is full of expectations. I think every fan base forgets what their team was like last year. Even the bad teams, their fans think that the next year is going to be a new year. And with that comes big expectations for so many players and pressure essentially. And we alluded to this in recent weeks that we would give a bit of a deep dive into these players, but the players that are facing the most pressure going to the season. What are we going to do? 10 players for our list, 5 each?
Yeah, I guess we'll alternate 10, 9, 8. I mean, I don't really think there's a particular there's a couple players that I'm like, okay, they should be there, but it's such a mismatch and you can't really separate a lot of them. But so I don't know. Do you want to do it in order, or is it just kind of alternate here?
I mean, you know what? We won't do it necessarily in order. We can give a bit of this guy is facing a ton of pressure when we're speaking about the player, but I have no idea the players that you have written down. You have no idea the players that I've written down. If you take one of mine, I'm going to have to sort of adapt on the spot. I have 10. Sorry, we kept saying players. We're including coaches in this as well. I have a group of 10 players / coaches in here. So, and I'm going to speak about 5 of them. So we'll see what you discuss. We'll see what I discuss, and we'll go. You can start us off.
How about this? And before I'll go first, but do you have one? I know we said not in order, but do you have one of them that's like that guy's under the most pressure?
Yes. One guy, and I feel like you sort of feel the same way about this player. Just we talked about him on the show before.
So we'll leave him to the end.
Okay. That's fair.
Okay. So first, or I guess 10. So yeah, I do 10, you do 9. Okay. 10, I'm going to put Zach Taylor. Now, the Bengals have shown patience with him, which I think is good. They had that disaster first season with him. Obviously last year it looked good. Burrow got hurt. It kind of derails the whole thing. But if you're the Bengals, if you're the franchise, if you're the fans, you look at that offense now and it's there's got to be a big leap here. There's really no excuse for why you don't have a dynamic offense. Obviously the defense still needs work, and I'm not expecting them to be a playoff team, but there needs to be, I think it can't be an average year. You can't go in and be like, we were only a little bit better. I think there needs to be a significant jump by Burrow, the wide receivers, Mixon. It's got to all come together this year, I'd say, on offense. And if it does, then we're good. But then if it doesn't, I think Zach Taylor's job is kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, I had Zach Taylor written down on my list over here too. And one thing I'll say about him, you're right. It's good that they gave him a bit of time, and we saw Steve Wilkes get fired after 1 year with a bad quarterback and a bad team a couple of years ago. One thing I'll say about Zach Taylor is, though, maybe he can become a coach that lasts long and has moderate success with the Bengals, but I just don't think he has that special quality. If we look at bad teams in recent years, and 2 very new coaches that come to mind are Brian Flores and Joe Judge. Last year, the New York Giants started 0-6, 0-7, and they managed to turn their season around. And it just looked like a team that, okay, maybe they don't have star power all around, but they really were playing for their coach. Joe Judge was that culture setter, and I was really impressed. Like, it gave me a lot of optimism going forward about the team in general. Whereas the Bengals, the reason I'm more so optimistic is just because of the certain players that they've added. But in terms of a team as a whole, I don't know if Zach Taylor's the right guy to steer the ship. And of course, Brian Flores, 2 years in a row, he's overachieved with a team that essentially shouldn't have won as many games as they did. I don't know if Zach Taylor has done that in the same amount of time as these guys have, but still early days. It's only his third season. Hopefully, first full season of a healthy Joe Burrow. But you're right, pressure is definitely on this year. I'll go with another guy on my list. Carson Wentz, the Indianapolis Colts. He luckily got another chance. We see it so many times in this league that quarterbacks essentially don't live to their second team. He was so good a couple of years ago. Last season was just a disaster. I think we're going to find out if it was more of the situation that he was in or if something changed with the player he is. I still think he can play. But he's not in a situation where he's going to get 2 or 3 seasons to prove himself. The Colts have a phenomenal roster, Super Bowl ready roster, in my opinion. They need the right guy to take them there. If Carson Wentz is a step up on Phillip Rivers, the Colts will win playoff games this year, but there's a ton of pressure around him.
Yeah, I mean, I think what gives him the most pressure is that Frank Reich is the coach, and you've seen him succeed with him. If it was a completely new head coach, he never worked with him before, and then it's like, okay, maybe we'll give him a second year. If he really struggles, I don't know if he gets the benefit of, we'll give you the first 5 games of, I guess, what would that be, 2022 or 3? I don't even know, whatever. But the next season following this one. But yeah, it's because you've already had success with Frank Reich. I think people kind of expect it to be week 1, we're ready to go. And it's just, there's not really going to be a bunch of ramp up time for him, I don't believe. So yeah, I think this is it. If he doesn't succeed here, it might be kind of over as a starter for him.
Yeah, I think we'll know by Thanksgiving whether Carson Wentz is the player we saw in his second season, or if he's the player that struggled a lot last year. And then it's a decision of whether the Colts want to stick with him going forward. He's still making a ton of money, but thankfully the Eagles are paying for most of it this year. But who do you got for your next player?
All right. So in the number 8 spot, I'm going to go another coach. I'll save my players towards the bottom of the list. But number 8, I have Pete Carroll. Now, he's had a bunch of success. He obviously won a Super Bowl, multiple Super Bowl trips. But I feel like if it's another year of, I mean, the reason he's on the list is because I think the expectations are so high. I think if they make the playoffs, but they don't win one game, I think it might be over for him in a situation where it's like the franchise uses the excuse of things have kind of just gone stale. We've kind of plateaued and we don't believe he can get us to the next level. And to be honest, I think there's some validity to that. And I think there's a good chance that it's a sneaky, he might be gone after this year. It could be another year after that, but I think there's a real chance that another year of Russell Wilson wasted potentially of a wild card loss. I don't think Seattle's going to take that, and I think he could be gone.
That's interesting. I didn't have Pete Carroll, but I really agree with everything you said, especially the fact that he could be like, it feels, I think the general feeling around Seattle, especially with how good the NFC West is and how everyone around them is upgrading and they're sort of just holding with what they have. I don't like, this doesn't feel like a Super Bowl team, but it obviously feels like a playoff team just because of the stars that they have, Russell Wilson, Jamal Adams, DK Metcalf. So I do feel a change is coming in Seattle, especially with what happened in this offseason earlier where Russell Wilson wasn't the happiest of the situation where he is. So not a bad shout. Pete Carroll could be the end of the road for him, essentially, this year. There is a lot of pressure in Seattle. All right, next on my list, and I don't know if this is being entirely fair, but I feel that it deserves a bit of a discussion. Lamar Jackson. He's approaching a contract year. We've seen, obviously, the Chiefs committed to Mahomes long-term. Houston committed to Deshaun Watson long-term. I know that situation's gone south, but the fact is they gave him that second contract. The Bills are starting talks with Josh Allen. The Cleveland Browns are going to commit to Baker Mayfield. Lamar Jackson is in a position, and the Baltimore Ravens, where, he has been phenomenal in the regular season. And I do think a lot of the criticism that he gets is unfair. And yes, he won his first playoff game this year against the Titans. But if it's another disappointing playoff, and I know this year he won a playoff game, but I don't know. I don't really feel that highly of what the Ravens accomplished last season. Losing to Buffalo and how they lost with that pick in the end zone, it left a poor taste in my mouth. I do think there's pressure on Lamar Jackson because he's going to demand such a big contract. I think the Ravens might have to think twice if it's a similar ending to what we've seen in past years about writing him a big check.
So I thought about having him on the list. I agree with everything you said, obviously, but I left him out of the names that I put on the list for a couple of reasons. I think the Ravens are going to be good again this year. There's no way they aren't. They have one of the best rosters in the league. He's going to be dynamite in the regular season, like barring injury. He's always good in every regular season he's basically played. If they fail again in the playoffs, I see him getting one more crack at it. So that's why I left him off the list, because I don't know if it's chopping block just yet. Even if he fails,
I don't think it's chopping block.
Okay,
I just think it's
enough.
The whole contract negotiation thing. I mean, Baltimore is going to have to sit there because we know he's going to be asking for the Josh Allen money, the Baker or the Patrick Mahomes money, the Deshaun Watson money. And I think that's where it becomes a difficult decision for Baltimore. And I think it could be a nasty negotiation situation.
Yeah.
If once again he doesn't, because this roster's ready to win. I do think so. The defense in the offseason took a bit of a hit, but I still think it's a very, very strong roster.
All right. So number 6 now. Number 6. Okay, so I'll go with Stafford.
Stafford, really.
Reason why there's no more excuses have been made for him his whole career. Well, whether or not they're legitimate, you can argue both ways. I think there's a lot of the excuses that people have given him are valid. There are no more. Mm-hmm. Is there any better team to go to for any quarterback than the Rams? Probably not. Maybe the Chiefs, but whatever. He's on the Rams. There's a bunch of he's going to play in more primetime games this year than he doesn't play primetime. You don't play primetime games in Detroit. You play your Thanksgiving game, and that's about it. Maybe one Monday nighter against the Packers. Other than that, your 1 o'clock spot. Now you got 4 o'clocks, and you got the Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night. All eyes are going to be on him. There's just a lot of public pressure. A lot of people want to see him fail, and a lot of people want to see him do really well. It's kind of mixed. I don't know how many players have more public pressure than Matt Stafford this year.
And I just think because he's going with Sean McVay as well, that adds a bit of a different element. It's almost like they expect him to be better than he was in Detroit, where I don't know if he'll necessarily be better. I just think that finally his efforts will result in wins, and I hope they do. This is a guy I'm rooting for. I know you're rooting for him, obviously, being a Lions fan, even though you're at the same time hoping for a better draft pick from the Rams. That's a bit of an interesting situation for you. But maybe I just didn't consider him at all for mine because in my head, he's going to be great. Like I've already, you know how high I am on the Rams. Yep. The moment this trade went down, I put them right at the top of my teams in the NFC. So maybe I just feel like they're that good already. But there is a chance that maybe things don't go as well. And that's where I see pressure coming in. Where are we now? Number 5?
Yes. Yep.
All right. I think I'll go with a coach here. Okay. Mike McCarthy in Dallas. Mm-hmm. This is a guy that I was almost calling for the Cowboys to move on for him last season. Looking back, foolish thing to say. Just a bad look on my part. You don't move off a coach that quickly. But at the same time, look at this Cowboys team. They are loaded like haven't seen in some time on the offensive side of the ball. Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, the trio of wide receivers who could all potentially be wide receiver ones elsewhere. Michael Gallup, maybe not, but he's still a very, very good player. Tight ends, they got Blake Jarwin and Dalton Schultz. The offensive line took a bit of a hit with Travis Frederick, but it's still going to be very, very good. The defensive side of the ball, yeah, it's not the greatest, but Micah Parsons is coming in. Trayvon Diggs is going to be better in year 2. They added Keanu Neal, and they also got Dan Quinn, a defensive coordinator. If the Cowboys are in a position, fully healthy, if they're not winning playoff games, I think McCarthy's got to go. Because it comes to the point where else do you point to being the problem? Because the roster is pretty loaded.
I mean, when you say playoff games, that means 2, at least 2. You think they're going to win 2 playoff games?
I mean, I feel they should have home field advantage. Okay. I feel they should be coming out of the NFC East 100%. I know you're a big Giants guy, but I still think Dallas is the team to beat. I don't know, like you're paying Dak big money. You got all these guys who can make plays. To me, this is your Super Bowl window now. These are the years that there's no excuses. You need to push. You need to be fighting at the top. And if McCarthy's not the guy that can show that he can do that, I think he should be on the way out. So there's a ton of pressure in my eyes on him in year 2, because year 1, frankly, was a disaster. I know Dak went down, but it was a disaster even when he was there.
You got to win that division.
Yeah.
The Cowboys should have won the division last year. There's really no excuse for not winning it. But
last year, Dak Prescott going down was a pretty big excuse. But even with
still,
I'm saying,
Dalton, come on. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, let's stick with the Cowboys at number 4. And I'm going to go with Zeke. Now, did he get a contract extension with 2 years left in his original deal? Do I have that right?
Yes, he did.
All right. So, nice. I mean, that's
good for him, though. Like,
good for you. I mean,
you have to respect the craft to get that done.
That's the best way to show that you're really in it for the love of the game. I think that's one of the main things that people will point to. It's obviously not about the money. No, but last year he struggled. He couldn't hold on to the football. I mean, he just fumbled. Every time I turned on the Cowboys game, it felt like Zeke was fumbling the ball. I don't know what was going on. If you extend your contract 2 years out from it being done, you better perform like a top 5 running back. Now, Cowboys fans up until last year thought he was Barry Sanders, just reincarnated apparently. But if Zeke is not top 3, that like he's got to be back to that elite level, or now it's no longer a down year. It's now
essentially becomes a bad contract.
Is this what Zeke is? And you now have easily one of the worst contracts in the NFL.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll give you a down year. Okay, you had a down year. You forgot how to hold a football. You figured that out in the offseason. Hopefully, come back. I want to see top 5 Zeke. And if not, it's a bad you can't pay a running back that much money and him not be top 5. There's no excuse.
Okay, I sympathize for running backs because I honestly believe their best years are their first 3-4 years, and that's when they're on their rookie deal still. So, I understand. It's a different position. You don't have the luxury of a quarterback or even some other these positions. Wide receivers can play into their 30s. We're seeing Larry Fitzgerald do it. And Frank Gore is not the standard of running back. You have to leave him out of the question. That's not normal what he's doing. So I understand, wanting that contract early, but at the same time, since he's gotten that contract and last year specifically, it wasn't great for him. I think he'll honestly bounce back. I think the fumbles were very much a one-off. He's been known to be a guy that can hold on to the football, and he's just established himself as a bell cow back thus far in the league. So I do think he'll bounce back. But that being said, I think there's pressure on Zeke just as much as like I talked about with Mike McCarthy. All right, we're approaching the top of the list now. I think you have one left to do. I have two left. Number 3, we promised we would save one guy for the end, but I'm gonna put Tua out there. That's not the guy that I was alluding to earlier. I'm gonna say that there's pressure on Tua this season, and I think all the criticism is extremely unwarranted that he's dealt with at this stage in his career. And I thought he was actually decent, if not good, as a rookie. The reason I think there's pressure this year is because I think there needs to be a big jump in what we saw last year. He needs to go from a quarterback that is, dare I say, reliant on a good defense, because the games that they won last year was mostly propelled by game management from the quarterback, no turnovers, winning the time of possession, and just elite defense with that ball hawk that they have in Xavier Howard. The weapons that they added this year, Will Fuller, Jalen Waddle, his college teammate, Devontae Parker is going to be healthy, hopefully this year for the full season. Mike Gesicki is what I think a top 10 tight end in the NFL, 100%. I think Tua needs to take a big jump. I think he will. I'm very confident in him. But there's definitely pressure to succeed in this system, because Miami, I honestly believe, yes, the O-line is a bit of a question mark just because of it's so young and inexperienced. But I think they've given him all the tools to succeed now. They've completed their rebuild. Now's the time for them to compete.
I think this is one of the rare. So Tua was one of my names. I was going to leave him off just because I think even if he is bad, I think he's got another year. So I left him off compared to the name that I will say in a moment. But this is one of the rare times I feel like the media has actually created real pressure. A lot of times it's fake and franchises kind of are doing their own thing. And I do think a lot of times that, like, I think people think that teams and players and coaches will listen to the media a lot more than they actually do. But I think this might be a situation. People are going to be on to it from the jump if he's not good. Every radio show, every debate show is going to be ripping on him. It seems like nobody in the media defends him. It's everybody likes to jump on and rip him. So yeah, he's got to come out of the gates flying here. And if he doesn't, yeah, it's going to be hell for you, Miami Dolphins fans.
Yeah. And I've been thinking a lot about why there's so much hate on him from the media. One of the things is obviously it doesn't help that Justin Herbert had one of the best rookie seasons ever, and Joe Burrow was pretty solid when he was here too. If you think about it, if you look at the numbers, Joe Burrow's numbers and Tua's numbers are very, very similar. I honestly think it was the 2 games where Tua, everyone's saying that he was benched. He was more so pulled or protected even. And they did throw Ryan Fitzpatrick in there. But if their quarterback was anyone other than Ryan Fitzpatrick, I don't think they would have made that move. I don't know. It was a funny year for Tua coming off that hip surgery. No OTAs, no preseason. He's working in Miami right now. He's at OTAs, working with all his receivers, even before they had this little team activities. But I think I'm very confident in Tua this year, and I think he'll silence the critics, hopefully fairly quickly.
All right, moving on to number 2. All right, I'll say the 3 names. The ones I don't say, I guess, are honorable mentions. But for me, because one, I think we both have the same. He has to be on the list. But it's kind of between Drew Lock, Cam Newton, why did I say 3? I meant 2. Excuse me, Drew Lock and Cam Newton. If you look at, I'll go with Drew Lock, I guess. If you look at Drew Lock, it's not really he's not a big name in the NFL. Like, people really don't pay too much attention to him. But if you look at just any player's individual pressure that they have on themselves, really, it's like they brought in Teddy Bridgewater because they clearly are not 100% confident in you. You're probably going to be the week 1 starter, so they're going to give you one more chance. And if you look at he might have the most pressure because he might only get 2 to 3 games. And then if Teddy takes over, I don't think he probably doesn't start for another NFL franchise. And that could be it for him as a start. He'll probably be a career backup, but this is it. You got 1 to 3 games basically to audition for the starting role again.
Yeah, it's at the point where honestly, if the Broncos get off to an 0-2, 1-3 start, they're leaning on Teddy and they're putting Teddy in going forward. And then if they finish, let's say Drew Lock does sort of survive in there, but it's what are the new records now? 9-8, 8-9 season. Maybe they're even looking at drafting a quarterback. I'm honestly really surprised they didn't draft Justin Fields. Maybe they want to see one more year of Drew Lock, but I don't know. Maybe it's early to say this, but I honestly think Denver's a similar team to Indianapolis and how they're built. They have a very, very strong roster. So the time to win is now. They don't really have a lot of time to waste on experimenting with quarterbacks. So I do think you're right on saying that Drew Lock, this is really his last chance to be a starting quarterback for an NFL franchise. Number one, the long anticipated number one player. You know who I'm going to say. I know who you would be saying if you were in this position. It has to be Daniel Jones.
I was going to say Deshaun Watson's lawyer. No, I'm joking. Continue.
No, it has to be. It does have to be Daniel Jones. The Giants have surrounded him with a ton of weapons this offseason. The defense was phenomenal last year. It was a top 10 unit, perhaps even better. They retained Leonard Williams. They added Adoree Jackson. The secondary is extremely loaded. And then they went out, they got Kenny Golladay, Saquon Barkley is going to be back. Kyle Rudolph, they added for a little bit of veteran experience. The team is essentially built that if Daniel Jones succeeds and is very good, I mentioned that Dallas has to win the NFC East earlier, but if Daniel Jones can be a very good quarterback, they'll be at that Dallas level, if not even better, just because they have the defense as well. If Daniel Jones doesn't really improve on what we've seen, I think they'll be around the 9-8 area. And then, of course, if you take a step back, it's just a disaster. But we've seen some good things from Daniel Jones in his career thus far. We've seen some not so great things as well. So everything is riding on him this season.
Another layer of kind of pressure to it is they have the Bears' first-round pick next year. Chances are, that pick is probably going to be, if I had to guess, high-end top, like maybe around 10 and low-end 20. That's where the Bears are probably going to be next year. So obviously if Daniel Jones struggles, that means the Giants won't be too good. They'll have the draft capital to move up into the top. They want a quarterback. Mm-hmm. They can move up into the top 3. No doubt about it. They'll be able to do that. So it's not like, oh, we have no first-round picks. You're our only guy. No, they'll go out next year without a doubt and get a new quarterback who they think will be better. But it's hard to remember a situation where a team has kind of just went all in on a quarterback, just with doubt. I'm not obviously going to go all in on Mahomes. That makes no difference. But they've said, you're our guy, prove it. And now there's just no excuses. You mentioned Kyle Rudolph. I think a very underrated, everybody talks about, obviously you're going to say Golladay, Kadarius Toney in the first round because it's just flashy. I think Kyle Rudolph is a big get for them. You now have, if Evan Ingram, a Pro Bowler last year, maybe the worst Pro Bowler of all time, taking out Xavier Rhodes. But Kyle Rudolph's a solid tight end. So you have 2 solid tight ends. You have a legitimate number 1. You have a new kind of speedy toy, Kadarius Toney. You still got Sterling Shepard. You still got Darius Slayton.
Yeah, don't forget about Darius Slayton. Very underrated in my eyes.
It's a really good wide receiver core. You mentioned if he takes that step and, they can compete with Dallas. I know I believe in them a lot more than certain teams, but if he takes a legitimate step, that's a playoff win team. That's maybe I believe in the roster.
How good do you think he has to be to be? I think are you talking Justin Herbert level of numbers and execution on the football field?
If Daniel Jones,
a little less than that.
If Daniel Jones is what Baker was last year, it's scary to say this because I didn't even make the playoffs last year, but that's NFC Championship quality team.
Okay, I don't think they're just Baker. Okay. I don't know. Maybe you think Baker Mayfield's a little bit better than I do. The defense is good. I do believe in the defense. It's just I still think it's going to take a lot to touch those NFC West teams. I don't know. I think you'd have to be a little bit better. To me, if it's Baker Mayfield level of play, I think they're fighting with Dallas for the division,
really,
and maybe a playoff win. Yeah.
So
I don't know. It takes a lot to be the best in the NFL. I think it takes more than.
I don't know. I think you talk about how good you think the roster is. I mean, I don't think you think it's that good.
To me, you look at how Cleveland's built because you gave the Baker Mayfield. I think they're a good team. Would I ever pick them to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs? No.
They almost beat them.
With Mahomes going down. I don't know. To me, these big quarterbacks, that's what wins in the NFL. Phenomenal quarterback play.
I don't know. I expect big things out of Saquon too.
Okay, that's fair. And that does add a bit of a different dimension, but I don't know. We'll see. There's regardless of what we expect, there's pressure on Daniel Jones, and the team expects a lot from him, hence him coming in at number 1 on our list.
Let's add one more here. I'm going to say me because I went all in on the Giants. So now there's a lot of pressure on me.
And I'll say me
I'm
because
either going to be wildly
jersey.
wrong. I'm going to be wildly wrong or wildly right about the Giants here. There's going to be no in between. They're either going to be a playoff win type team, or maybe they just win 6 games again. Maybe they finish 3rd
in the division. If the football team takes down the Giants, we got to make some sort of bet, because I was pretty high on the football team after free agency and, after the draft as well.
Do you still think but you think the Giants finish second? Giants? If you're going to predict it. Or you think Washington finished second?
No, I think I'd have to go with the Giants, because I think Daniel Jones will be more consistent than Ryan Fitzpatrick. I watched a lot of Ryan Fitzpatrick in the last 2 seasons. One of my favorite players to watch in the NFL. Some weeks he will rip the ball into the tightest window and throw 3 touchdowns. Some weeks he'll do the exact same thing, rip the ball into the tightest window and throw 3 interceptions. And I think ultimately that will cost Washington in certain weeks. But what is it today? June 3rd?
June 3rd.
98 days to go to the NFL. So lots of time.
Opening the week 1. Best week in the NFL, in my opinion.
I think week 18 is going to be pretty solid this year, but hey, we'll see. I think that's going to do it for the end of the show today. Do you want to give a podcast update what the future of the show is looking like?
Yeah, we're done. No, yeah, sure. Do you want to do that right now? Yeah, I guess so. We're
I mean, it is. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. It is a bit of a downtime. It is the summer, of course, as well. Both of us are, all 3 of us actually. Have to throw in producer Paolo as well. It is pretty busy times for us now, so it's probably not going to be coming every week, maybe bi-weekly, but we're going to be breaking down each division going forward throughout the offseason. Standings, I'm sure. I don't even know if we have to do the NFC East, because probably it seems like we have a debate about the NFC East every single week, but we are going to be focusing on different divisions each episode going forward.
Yeah, I mean, just with the schedule, so bi-weekly most likely, but like if Julio gets traded, we'll do an episode that if it's not if we just did an episode and then Julio gets traded, we'll do an episode 2 weeks in a row. It's just kind of like, I mean, we could break down maybe we'll do film rooms on Jalen Reagor and what went wrong. Yeah. I think that I should have put him on my list. Yeah, but no, I mean, he's done.
Alrighty, well, that's going to do it for the end of the episode today. If you made it to the end, thank you so much once again for tuning in. Drop a comment on who you think's facing the most pressure. I think that's a good subject for today. And make sure you like, subscribe, or if you're listening on Google, Apple, or Spotify, leave us 5 stars and drop a review as well. And we'll see you next time.
Have a good week, guys.